My husband called me at 9:47 in the morning on the day we had spent 3 years building toward, and the first thing he said wasn't "good morning" or "how are you holding up" or even "traffic is a nightmare out here." The first thing he said was, "Ashley is going to cut the ribbon with me. You don't need to come." I stood in our kitchen in the middle of a swampy July heat wave, holding my phone so tight the case creaked, and I didn't say anything for a full 5 seconds. Then I said, "Okay." Just that, one word, and I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I walked to the bedroom, pulled my carry-on from the closet, and started packing for New York. And 2 days later, when the financial news broke, when the numbers went public and the analysts started talking, my husband finally understood exactly what he had thrown away. Not just me, everything. But let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the 15 years that came before that phone call. I'm Nora. I'm 42 now, though I was 40 when all of this started unraveling. I'm a hairstylist, have been since I was 23, when I finished cosmetology school and walked straight into a chair at a mid-range salon in Chicago and never left. Not that salon specifically. I worked my way through 4 different places over the years, building clientele, learning color theory until I could do it in my sleep, saving money in a way that everyone around me said was obsessive, but that I called survival instinct. I grew up with a mother who spent money the way other people breathed, automatically, without thinking, without stopping, and a stepfather named Gerald who controlled every dollar she ever earned and made sure she knew it. Gerald wasn't violent. He was something quieter and more corrosive than that. He was the kind of man who could smile at you across a dinner table while methodically dismantling every financial decision you'd ever made, and then hand you a $20 bill for groceries like he was doing you a favor. My mother called it being careful with money. I called it what it was, a slow financial suffocation that she never fully escaped, even after he left. So I was careful. I was meticulous. By the time I met Dominic at a mutual friend's birthday party in Lincoln Park, I had $34,000 in savings, no credit card debt, and a client list that kept my books full 3 weeks out. I was 30 years old. I had 2 cats named Fig and Pepper, a gray tabby and a black and white tuxedo, respectively, and I had a very clear sense of what I would and would not tolerate from any man who wanted to be in my life. Dominic seemed like the answer to every standard I'd set. He was 34, funny in a dry way that took you a second to catch, and he was building something, a commercial real estate consulting firm that was still small but had real bones to it. He talked about business the way I talked about hair, with genuine love for the craft, with specific language, with the kind of detail that only comes from actually caring. On our 3rd date, he pulled out a cocktail napkin and drew me a rough map of where he wanted the company to be in 10 years. I still have that napkin somewhere in a box. We got married in June, a warm, almost muggy Saturday at a venue near Wicker Park 15 years ago. I was 30, he was 34. Fig and Pepper came to the apartment we rented together, and for the first few years, everything was genuinely good. Not perfect. Dominic worked insane hours, and I had a habit of going quiet when I was upset instead of saying what was wrong, which he found maddening. But we worked at it. We went to couples counseling twice, both times voluntarily, both times because we wanted to fix things before they broke. The business grew. I grew too. I started renting my own suite inside a larger salon collective in River North around year 7 of our marriage. My own space, my own name on the door, my own booking system. I kept my finances separate from Dominic's at first, the way my accountant advised. But somewhere around year 9 or 10, we started blending things. Joint accounts, shared investment accounts. I put money into the business, his business, Dominic Calloway Consulting, because it made sense on paper and because I trusted him completely. That last part was the mistake. Not the trust itself, maybe, but the completeness of it. The blending happened gradually, and I didn't notice until years later how much of my financial independence had quietly dissolved into our shared life. Not because Dominic demanded it. He never demanded anything outright. It was more like water finding its way through a crack, slow, patient, constant. My separate savings account got folded into a joint, high-yield account for better interest. My salon suite lease got co-signed by Dominic when the building changed ownership and required a guarantor, which seemed practical at the time and only became a problem later. My name appeared on his business documents in ways I didn't fully track because I was busy running my own books, managing 12 regular clients a day in July heat that made the salon feel like a greenhouse, even with the AC cranked. That's the thing about slow financial suffocation. You don't feel it happening. You feel comfortable. You feel like a team. You feel like the person next to you is building something with you, not gradually making sure that you can't leave without losing half of what you built. By the time Dominic brought up the idea of expanding the consulting firm into a full commercial real estate development company, actual properties, actual construction projects, a ribbon cutting and everything, I had been pouring both money and time into his vision for years. I had clients who came to me specifically because I was the kind of person who showed up, who remembered their daughter's name, who could make a 50-year-old woman feel like herself again in 45 minutes. I had built something real with my hands, literally with my hands, and I had also quietly helped build something real with my money and my name and my belief in Dominic. The new company, Callaway Development Group, was supposed to have my name in it too. We'd talked about it, not formally, not in a legal document I could point to, but in the way married people talk about things they assume are understood. Over dinner, in bed, in the car on the way back from meetings with architects. "This is ours," he said more than once. "Everything I'm building is ours." Ashley came into the picture about 18 months before that July morning. She was 29, a marketing consultant Dominic hired to build the brand for Callaway Development. She was sharp, I'll give her that. She knew how to make a real estate project look like a lifestyle choice. She redesigned the logo, built the website, got them features in 2 Chicago business publications. She was good at her job. She was also, as I would eventually piece together, very good at being available to Dominic in ways that went well beyond her contract. I didn't know that yet on the morning he called me. Or rather, I suspected it the way you suspect a smell in the walls. You're not sure. You hope you're wrong. You keep painting over it. What I knew on that July morning was that the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the first Callaway Development property, a mixed-use building in the West Loop that I had personally contributed $47,000 toward, was happening at 11 a.m., and my husband had called me at 9:47 to tell me not to come, because Ashley would be cutting the ribbon with him. "She's the face of the brand," he said before I hung up. "It makes more sense visually. You understand." I understood something, just not what he thought I understood. Fig was sitting on the kitchen counter when I hung up. He wasn't supposed to be up there, but I'd given up enforcing that rule about 2 years in, and Pepper was somewhere in the bedroom, probably pressed flat under the bed because she always sensed when the air in the apartment changed. Fig looked at me with that specific cat expression that manages to convey complete indifference and total attention simultaneously. "Okay," I said out loud, to the cat, to the room, to myself. "Okay." I pulled up the airline app on my phone. There was a 12:15 flight to LaGuardia. I booked it. Not because I had a plan exactly, but because I had a contact in New York, a woman named Celeste, who ran a high-end salon in Midtown and had been trying to get me to come out for a consultation for 3 months. I had been putting her off because of the business launch, because of Dominic, because I kept telling myself this wasn't the right time. Standing in my kitchen in the July heat, with Fig watching me from the counter and my marriage unraveling in slow motion, I decided it was exactly the right time. I texted Celeste, "I'm coming to New York tomorrow. Is the offer still open?" Her response came in 40 seconds. "Yes, get here." I packed. I fed the cats. I arranged for my neighbor B, a retired teacher who loved Fig and Pepper almost as much as I did, to check in on them while I was gone. I did not call Dominic back. I did not text him. I did not leave a note. I took a car to O'Hare, got through security, sat at the gate with a black coffee and my phone face down on my knee, and I thought about Gerald, My stepfather. The man who had spent years making my mother feel like she needed his permission to exist financially. I thought about how I had watched that happen and sworn it would never happen to me. I thought about $47,000, about a joint account, about a lease with my name on it. I thought about the phrase, "You don't need to come." My flight boarded at noon. The ribbon cutting was happening across the city at 11 a.m., already done by the time I was in the air. Ashley's hands on whatever ceremonial scissors Dominic had ordered, her smile in the photos that were probably already being uploaded to the company's Instagram. The company that had my money in its foundation, literally in its concrete. The thing about spending 15 years building something with someone is that you learn, eventually, exactly what it's worth. And you learn, if you're paying attention, whether your name is actually on it. Somewhere over Ohio, I opened my email and wrote a very short message to my attorney. Her name was Patricia Webb, and she had been my attorney for 6 years, handling everything from my salon suite lease to a minor dispute with a supplier. I had never asked her to do what I was about to ask her to do. I typed, "Patricia, I need to know everything that's in my name, everything that's in Dominic's name, and everything in between. I need a full picture. How fast can you get me that?" I hit send. Then I put the phone away and watched the clouds out the window, and thought about the fact that I had spent 15 years being careful about everything, except the one person I should have been most careful about. The flight attendant came by with drinks. I asked for water. Below me, somewhere, my husband was standing in front of a building I had helped pay for, smiling for photographs with a 29-year-old woman, while I flew away from everything we had supposedly built together. He didn't call. He didn't text. He probably assumed I was home, angry and quiet the way I always got when I was upset, painting over the smell in the walls. He didn't know that I had stopped painting. He didn't know about Celeste, or what she had been asking me about for 3 months, or what I had said yes to from 30,000 feet over the Midwest. He didn't know that 2 days from now, something would appear in the financial news, something that had been quietly in motion for longer than he realized, and that when he finally looked up from whatever he was doing and saw my name in print, it would be the first time he truly understood that I had not been sitting still. I closed my eyes. The plane hummed around me. Fig was probably back on the counter by now, and Pepper was probably still under the bed, and somewhere in the West Loop there were photographs being taken of a ribbon I was supposed to have cut. Let them have their ribbon. I was 37,000 feet in the air, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Celeste Okafor ran the kind of salon that made you forget salons could be anything less. It occupied the entire 4th floor of a building on West 57th Street, and when I walked in on a Tuesday morning with my carry-on still rolling behind me, she came out from behind the reception desk and hugged me like we'd known each other for 20 years, instead of having met twice at industry conferences. "You look exhausted," she said, pulling back and studying my face with the clinical eye of someone who had been reading people's stress in their scalps for decades. "I am exhausted," I said. "Good. Exhausted means you finally stopped running in place." She handed me a coffee and pointed at a chair. "Sit, then tell me what it's actually going to take to get you here." We talked for 4 hours. The offer she'd been floating for 3 months was real and specific. A partnership stake in the salon, not just a consulting arrangement. Celeste wanted to expand her color program, bring in a trainer, build something she could eventually step back from without it collapsing. She'd seen my work at a trade event in Atlanta the previous spring, a color correction I'd done on a client with a particularly brutal DIY disaster, and she hadn't forgotten it. "I'm not looking for an employee," she said. "I'm looking for someone who builds things." I thought about that phrase for a second. Someone who builds things. I'd been building things for 15 years. The question was, whose name had ended up on them? "I need to know the numbers," I said. She slid a folder across the table. The numbers were good, more than good. The partnership buy-in was $85,000, which was significant, but the projected revenue share over 3 years made it sensible in a way that took my breath away slightly. This was not a favor. This was a business proposition from a woman who knew what she was doing. I need a few weeks, I told her. There are things I need to untangle first. She nodded like she already knew what kind of untangling I meant. Take what you need. The offer doesn't expire. I flew back to Chicago on Thursday. Patricia Webb had already sent me a preliminary summary by the time I landed. 41 pages of documents, account statements, co-signatures, and business filings, organized by category with a short note at the top that said, "Call me as soon as you're back. There are some things here you need to hear in person." I called her from the car on the way home from O'Hare. "The $47,000 you put into Callaway Development," Patricia said without preamble. "It wasn't structured as a loan. It was structured as a capital contribution." Meaning what, exactly? Meaning it went in as equity, which means it's part of the marital estate, which means, depending on how things go, you may have a claim to considerably more than $47,000. I watched Chicago go past the window. How much more? That depends on the valuation of the company, which, based on what I'm seeing in these filings, Nora, the company is worth significantly more than Dominic has ever indicated to you. There was a property acquisition in March that he didn't mention, and there's a capital raise that closed 6 weeks ago. She paused. He brought in outside investors, without telling you, and he did it using assets that are partially in your name. I sat with that for a moment. The road hummed under the car. "Patricia, what does that mean legally?" "It means," she said carefully, "that you have leverage, significant leverage, and it means that before he files anything or makes any moves, you need to be the one who moves first." I walked into my apartment and Fig was on the counter and Pepper was under the bed, and nothing had changed except that I had. The apartment felt different, not smaller exactly, but more clearly like a place I was passing through rather than a place I lived. Dominic came home at 7 that evening. He walked in and saw my carry-on by the door, still half unpacked, and he looked at me with an expression I can only describe as carefully composed. Like he'd rehearsed something on the drive home and was checking whether he still needed it. "You went somewhere," he said. "New York," I said. "I told you I might." He hadn't known. He'd assumed I was home, angry, waiting. The realization moved across his face in about half a second, and he covered it well but not perfectly. "How was it?" "Productive. We had dinner. It was almost surreal. Pasta, the news on low in the background, Fig weaving around our ankles the way he always did when he wanted to be fed a second time. Dominic talked about the ribbon cutting. He said it went well. He said the photos looked great. He did not mention Ashley by name. He did not apologize. He talked about the ribbon cutting the way you'd talk about a routine meeting, something that happened, something that was fine, something that didn't require examination. I listened. I didn't push. I was very calm, which he probably mistook for acceptance. 2 days later, the financial news broke. It wasn't front-page national news, but in Chicago real estate circles it was significant. A local investigative outlet had published a piece about Callaway Development's capital raise, and in the course of reporting it, they had pulled the corporate filings. My name was in those filings, not as a passive investor, as a co-founder with an equity stake, because Dominic had listed me that way in the original articles of incorporation 3 years ago, probably to strengthen the company's narrative, probably because a husband and wife founding team looked better to certain investors, probably without thinking through what it actually meant legally. The article mentioned me by name, Nora Callaway, co-founder. It mentioned my background, the salon, the 15 years in the industry, the reputation. The journalist had done her homework. She'd even quoted a comment I'd made at an industry event 2 years ago about the intersection of service businesses and real estate development, a comment I barely remembered making. My phone started ringing at 8 a.m. and didn't stop. Dominic called at 8:14. I watched his name on the screen for 4 full rings and then answered. "Did you talk to a reporter?" His voice was tight in a way I hadn't heard before. "No," I said. "The reporter talked to public filings, filings that have my name on them, filings you put my name on." Silence. "Dominic," I said, "I need you to understand something. I know about the March acquisition. I know about the capital raise. I know that you used assets with my name on them to close that round without telling me. I kept my voice very even. Patricia Webb has been looking at all of it for the past 5 days. The silence on his end was different now, denser. We should talk, he finally said. We are talking. I mean in person, tonight. That's fine, I said. Bring your attorney. He showed up at 6 without an attorney, which told me something. He sat down at the kitchen table and he looked tired in a way that wasn't just about one bad week. He looked tired, the way people look when they've been managing something complicated for a long time, and it's finally gotten too heavy to carry without showing. He started with the justification. Ashley was a business decision. The ribbon cutting was optics. He'd been protecting me from the stress of the capital raise because I had enough going on. He'd always intended to tell me about the March acquisition. He just hadn't found the right moment. He loved me. He was trying to build something for us. I let him talk. I sat across from him at the same kitchen table where we'd eaten pasta 2 nights ago, with Fig somewhere behind me and the July evening coming through the window, and I let him say all of it. When he finished, I said, "On the biggest day for our company, and it was our company, Dominic, my name is literally in the Articles of Incorporation. You called me at 9:47 in the morning and told me Ashley would be cutting the ribbon with you, that I didn't need to come." I looked at him steadily. That's not optics. That's not protecting me. That's you telling me exactly where I stand, and I heard you. He opened his mouth. I'm not angry, I said. I was, for about 30 seconds. Then I booked a flight. I folded my hands on the table. I've talked to Patricia, I've talked to a financial analyst she brought in, and I've talked to Celeste Okafor, who is offering me a partnership stake in a New York salon that will, conservatively, outperform what I've been making in Chicago within 18 months. I paused. I'm telling you this not to threaten you. I'm telling you because you need to understand that when you called me that morning, you thought you were managing me. You thought I would sit here and be upset and eventually get over it. And I need you to understand that I have not been sitting still. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, a car went by. Fig jumped onto the counter. What do you want? Dominic finally said, and his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. A fair accounting, I said. Everything in, everything out. My $47,000 plus my equity stake, properly valued. The salon suite lease released from your co-signature. A clean separation. I looked at him. And I want it done without fighting, because I'm tired, and because fighting will cost both of us more than it's worth, and because I think somewhere underneath all of this, you know that what you did was not right. He didn't argue with that, which was, in its own way, the most honest thing he'd done in a long time. The divorce took 8 months. Patricia was thorough, and Dominic's attorney, once he eventually retained one, was sensible enough to recognize that going to litigation over the equity dispute would be expensive and public, and would likely result in worse outcomes for Dominic than the negotiated settlement Patricia was proposing. The Callaway Development equity stake, properly valued against the capital raise that had just closed, was worth considerably more than $47,000. My share of the marital estate, when everything was properly accounted for, came to just over $190,000. Plus, the salon suite lease was cleanly dissolved. Plus my own accounts, which had never fully merged despite the slow erosion I'd worried about on the flight to New York. Patricia found that my separate savings had remained legally distinct because I'd never formally executed the account consolidation Dominic had suggested 3 years ago. I'd just been slow about the paperwork, and it turned out that slowness had protected me. I signed the final divorce decree on a Thursday in March, 8 months after that July morning. I was 41 by then. Patricia walked me to the elevator afterward and said, "You handled this better than most." I told her I'd had a good teacher. She laughed and said her bill was in the mail. I moved to New York in April. I took Fig with me. He was 9 years old and had traveled before, and adapted to the new apartment in Brooklyn with the characteristic cat philosophy of finding the highest surface and claiming it. Pepper had died the previous November, quietly, at 14, in the way old cats sometimes go. She just went to sleep one afternoon on the bedroom windowsill and didn't wake up. I held her for a long time before I called the vet. She'd always known when the air in the room changed. I like to think she knew, at the end, that things were going to be okay. The partnership with Celeste became official in May. Buy-in came from the settlement funds, and I signed those papers with the specific physical sensation of writing my own name on something that was entirely, unambiguously mine. No co-signers, no silent contributions, no husband whose vision I was folding myself into. Celeste and I built the color program over the summer. We brought in 2 junior stylists and a client coordinator. By October, our booking waitlist was 6 weeks out. By the following February, we were profitable enough that I started thinking about the next thing, not because I was restless, but because that's who I am. I build things. I always have. I heard about Dominic and Ashley through a mutual acquaintance about a year after the divorce was final. They were together, apparently. She'd moved into the Lincoln Park condo that had been part of the marital settlement. His half, his problem. Someone sent me a screenshot of a social media post, the two of them at some event, smiling, her hand on his arm. I looked at it for about 10 seconds and then put my phone face down on my desk and got back to work. I didn't feel the thing people expect you to feel. I didn't feel vindicated exactly, or sad, or even particularly interested. I felt something closer to clarity, the kind that comes when you've been so close to something for so long that you couldn't see its actual shape, and then you step back far enough and it finally resolves into what it always was. He had wanted someone to stand next to him and look like part of the picture. He had Ashley for that now. I hoped, genuinely, that she understood the difference between being in the photograph and being in the building. The financial news piece that ran in July, the one that first put my name in print as co-founder, ended up being picked up by 2 larger outlets. A Chicago business magazine did a follow-up profile on me 6 months after I'd moved to New York, framed around women in creative industries making lateral pivots into business ownership. The journalist asked me what I would tell someone who was in a situation where their contributions weren't being recognized. I thought about what to say for a moment. I thought about Fig on the kitchen counter. I thought about the phone case creaking in my grip. I thought about a carry-on bag and a 12:15 flight and a text message that got a response in 40 seconds. I'd tell them, I said finally, that the moment someone tells you you don't need to be in the room, that's the moment you find a better room. The journalist wrote it down. It ended up as the pull quote. I read it on my phone one morning in the salon, between clients, with the Manhattan light coming through the 4th-floor windows, and Fig presumably asleep on his new favorite windowsill in Brooklyn, and I thought, yes, that's exactly right. That's the whole thing, distilled down to a sentence. You don't need to come. Okay. I found a better room, and this time, my name is on the door.